Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. We got a new story to tell, so let's start. Part 1. The Rooftop Prelude. The city stretched beneath us, a sea of shimmering lights and restless energy. From where I stood on the rooftop of the Belridge Hotel, I could see the life of the city moving on. Cars crawling through traffic, people bustling about their lives, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in mine. The rooftop bar was alive with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the low thrum of a DJ's set. Yet, despite the vibrance, I felt the first prickle of unease. "Ethan, could you grab me another drink?" Kate's voice pulled me back to the present. She stood a few feet away, surrounded by her co-workers, her smile dazzling and effortless. She had a way of commanding attention, and I'd always loved that about her. But tonight, something about it felt wrong. "Sure," I replied, my tone neutral. I turned toward the bar, weaving through the crowd, but my thoughts remained on her. Kate looked stunning tonight, dressed in a black cocktail dress that hugged her figure perfectly. But it wasn't just her appearance that had me distracted. It was the way she laughed too brightly at Mark's jokes, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder for a beat too long. Mark, the charming, perpetually grinning co-worker of hers, was always around lately. Too much, in my opinion. I reached the bar and ordered her drink, stealing a glance back at the group. Mark was leaning closer to her now, saying something that made her throw her head back in laughter. My grip tightened on the counter as I tried to push down the irritation bubbling inside me. "She has a magnetic way, doesn't she?" The bartender's voice startled me. He was an older man, polishing a glass as he nodded toward Kate. "Your girlfriend?" "My wife," I corrected automatically. He raised an eyebrow, his smile tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Lucky man," he said, sliding the drink toward me. "Hold on tight to her." I muttered my thanks and made my way back to Kate's group, her drink in hand. She barely noticed as I handed it to her, her attention fixed entirely on Mark. For the first time that evening, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Part 2. Shadows of Doubt. The night wore on, and the unease in my chest grew heavier. Kate and Mark were inseparable, and while I tried to brush it off as office camaraderie, there was an intimacy to their interactions that I couldn't ignore. My mind spun in circles, replaying every glance, every shared laugh, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Then came the note. It happened when I was seated alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey and trying to distract myself by watching the crowd. A waitress approached me, her expression unreadable as she slipped a folded piece of paper onto the counter. "For you," she said quietly before disappearing into the throng of people. Frowning, I unfolded the note. The handwriting was rushed but legible. "Watch your wife. Mark isn't just here for the drinks." I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. Who wrote this? And why? My first instinct was to crumple it up and toss it aside. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But as I glanced back at Kate and Mark, standing too close on the far side of the bar, my gut twisted with a feeling I couldn't shake. Something was wrong. I slipped the note into my pocket and rose from my seat. My focus narrowed as I moved through the crowd, zeroing in on the two of them. They were by the railing now, overlooking the city. Mark's body language was casual, but Kate's, her posture was different. Nervous, almost hesitant. She glanced around before leaning in to say something to him, her voice too low for me to hear. "Kate," I called out, my voice cutting through the hum of the bar. She startled, spinning around to face me. For a split second, I saw something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? But she quickly masked it with a smile. "Ethan, I was just telling Mark about the view. Isn't it gorgeous?" Mark turned to me, his ever-present grin firmly in place. "Your wife has great taste in rooftops," he said, his tone light, almost mocking. I didn't respond. My gaze flicked between the two of them, searching for answers that neither was willing to give. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. Kate's smile faltered. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of—" "No." I cut her off. "Now." Mark held up his hands in mock surrender. "I'll leave you two to it," he said, his grin never wavering as he backed away. The look he gave me before disappearing into the crowd sent a surge of anger through me. Kate crossed her arms, clearly irritated. "What's your problem, Ethan?" You're making a scene. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. What's going on with you and Mark? I asked, keeping my tone even. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly recovered. Mark? He's just a friend. Why would you even ask that? Because I'm not blind, I said. I see the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. You're being ridiculous. Mark flirts with everyone. It doesn't mean anything. Then explain this. I pulled the note from my pocket and handed it to her. Someone thought it meant enough to warn me. Kate's face drained of color as she read the note. Her hand trembled slightly, but she quickly composed herself, shoving the paper back into my hands. This is absurd, Ethan. Whoever wrote that is trying to stir up drama. Are they? I challenged, my voice rising. Because it looks to me like they were right. She glared at me, her frustration boiling over. I don't have to justify myself to you. If you can't trust me, that's your problem. No, Kate, I said, my voice shaking with anger. The problem is that I trusted you. And now I'm starting to think that was a mistake. Part 3. The rift deepens. Kate stood there, glaring at me, her jaw tight with defiance. The hum of the rooftop bars seemed distant, as though we were trapped in a bubble of tension that threatened to burst at any moment. I could feel the eyes of a few partygoers flicking in our direction, drawn by the undercurrent of conflict. What are you accusing me of, Ethan? She asked, her voice low but sharp. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm asking for the truth. What's really going on between you and Mark? She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. This is insane. Mark is a co-worker, that's it. We work on projects together. We share a few laughs. Why are you making this into something it's not? Because it feels like it is something, I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The way he looks at you, the way you act around him, it's not normal, Kate. She threw up her hands, exasperated. You're seeing what you want to see, Ethan. You've always been paranoid about these things. Paranoid. The word hit me like a slap. It wasn't the first time she'd accused me of overthinking, but this felt different. More cutting. More deliberate. Maybe you're right, I said quietly, the anger in my chest slowly giving way to a deep, gnawing sadness. Maybe I am paranoid, or maybe I'm finally seeing things for what they are. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to die on her lips. For the first time that night, she looked unsure, as though she didn't know what to say to diffuse the situation. That hesitation said more than any argument could. I need some air, she muttered, brushing past me toward the other side of the rooftop. I stood there for a moment, frozen, the note still clutched in my hand. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask, scenarios I didn't want to imagine. Eventually, I followed her, weaving through the crowd until I found her standing by the railing, staring out at the city. Part 4. A Shattered Illusion. Kate, I said softly as I approached. She didn't turn to look at me. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, the distant glow of the city casting her face in soft light. I don't know what you want me to say, Ethan, she said after a long silence. Her voice was quieter now, tinged with something I couldn't quite place, regret, maybe, or weariness. You're asking questions like you've already decided the answers. I haven't decided anything, I replied. I'm just trying to understand. I need to know if there's something, anything you're not telling me. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's not like that, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I swear nothing's happened. But, I don't know. Lately I've felt different. Different how? I pressed, stepping closer. She finally turned to face me, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. I don't know, she repeated. It's like I've been stuck in this routine, this box. And Mark, he just reminds me of what it felt like to be carefree, to be excited about something. Her words cut through me like a blade. So what? I asked, my voice trembling. You're saying I don't excite you anymore? That's not what I mean, she said quickly. It's not about you, Ethan. It's about me. I've been feeling lost, like I don't even know who I am anymore. And Mark is helping you figure that out? The bitterness in my voice was impossible to hide. Her expression faltered, guilt flashing across her face. I didn't plan for this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to get this far. So, it has gone somewhere, I said, my heart sinking further. Tell me the truth, Kate. How far has it gone? She hesitated, and in that moment of silence, the distance between us felt insurmountable. It hasn't gone anywhere, she said finally. Not physically, but emotionally. I don't know. Maybe. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I stepped back, struggling to catch my breath. So, you've been emotionally cheating on me, I said, the words sounding foreign as they left my mouth. It's not that simple, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan, I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't even realize what I was doing until tonight. But you did it, I said, my voice breaking. You let it happen. She reached out for me, but I stepped back, the pain too raw to let her touch me. Don't, I said. Just don't. Part 5. The beginning of the end. We left the rooftops separately that night. Kate lingered behind, likely to collect herself, while I took the elevator down to the lobby, my mind reeling. The city streets felt colder than usual as I walked aimlessly, trying to process everything she'd said. By the time I got home, the house was dark and empty. I sat in the living room, the note still in my pocket, and stared at the blank television screen. Every memory of Kate and me, our first date, our wedding, the countless nights we'd spent talking about our future, flooded my mind, now tainted by doubt. Hours later, I heard her key in the lock. She entered quietly, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. When she saw me sitting there, she froze, her eyes wary. I thought you'd be asleep, she said cautiously. I couldn't, I replied, my voice flat. She hesitated, then crossed the room to sit across from me. The tension between us was almost suffocating. What happens now? She asked softly. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a deep, aching sense of loss. I don't know, I admitted, but things can't go back to the way they were. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For once, she didn't try to argue, didn't try to justify or defend herself. She just sat there, broken and unsure, as the weight of her actions settled over both of us. The silence stretched between us, and for the first time, I wondered if our marriage was beyond saving. The days after the rooftop incident felt like walking on broken glass. Kate and I continued to navigate our lives in strained silence, the weight of our unresolved issues pressing down on every moment. She insisted nothing had happened between her and Mark, and though I wanted to believe her, my gut told me otherwise. Then came Friday. It had been a long week at work, and all I wanted was to go home, collapse on the couch, and let the monotony of a TV show distract me from the storm brewing in my head. But when Kate mentioned she'd be working late again, something inside me tensed. Mark's team is helping out, she said casually as she grabbed her laptop bag. We got a big deadline coming up, and everyone's staying late to finalize things. I nodded but didn't reply. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she chose not to. Either way, she kissed me on the cheek and left without another word, leaving the house feeling colder than it had all week. For hours, I sat in the living room, staring at my phone, debating whether to call her to test the waters and see if her story checked out. But I knew how that would go. She'd accuse me of not trusting her, and I'd feel like the villain for doubting her. By 9 o'clock, my anxiety was unbearable. I grabbed my coat and decided to go for a drive, hoping the cool night air would help clear my head. The city was alive with its usual Friday night buzz. Couples laughed over candlelit dinners, groups of friends crowded around bar entrances, and the streets were filled with a mix of joy and chaos. I drove aimlessly, letting the hum of the engine drown out my thoughts. I didn't plan to drive near her office. It just happened. At least, that's what I told myself as I found my car parked a block away from the sleek building she worked in. Her office lights were off, but that wasn't surprising. She'd said the team had moved to a nearby spot to work more comfortably. A bar, I remembered her saying. I wasn't sure why I walked toward the bar she'd mentioned. Maybe I wanted to prove myself wrong, to see her surrounded by co-workers and know she was telling the truth. Maybe I wanted to catch her in a lie. As I approached, I spotted her immediately. She was outside, standing under a flickering neon sign that read Silver Ivy. And she wasn't alone. Mark stood beside her, leaning casually against the wall, his body angled toward hers in a way that screamed intimacy. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm lightly. My stomach twisted as I stopped a few feet away, hidden in the shadows of the busy street. I told myself to leave, to turn around and walk away before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But my legs wouldn't move. Then it happened. Mark leaned in, his hand resting lightly on her back, and kissed her. It wasn't a casual peck. It was slow, deliberate. And the worst part? She didn't pull away. The world seemed to tilt around me, the noise of the city fading into a dull roar as I watched the woman I'd built my life with betray me in the most visceral way possible. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to storm over, to pull them apart and demand answers. But my feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. My fists clenched at my sides as I forced myself to stay hidden, watching as the kiss ended, and they stood there, talking like nothing had happened. Kate glanced around nervously, and for a moment I thought she might have spotted me. But her gaze shifted back to Mark, and she smiled, a small, private smile that twisted the knife deeper. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart pounded as I turned and walked away, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and devastation. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How long has this been going on? What does he have that I don't? Why wasn't I enough? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The streetlights blurred past as I tried to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to scream, to break something, to let out the storm of emotions tearing me apart. But all I could do was drive in silence, the weight of the betrayal crushing me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed dark and uninviting. Kate's car wasn't there yet. Of course it wasn't. She was still with him. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, unsure if I even wanted to go inside. The home we'd built together suddenly felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car and into the house. The silence inside was deafening. I poured myself a drink, downed it in one go, and sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. Images of the kiss replayed in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I'd suspected something was going on for weeks, but seeing it, really seeing it, was something else entirely. When Kate finally came home, it was nearly midnight. I heard her keys jingle as she unlocked the door, her boots clicking softly against the floor as she entered. "Ethan," she called out, her voice cautious. I didn't respond. She stepped into the living room, her eyes widening slightly when she saw me sitting in the dark. "What are you doing up? What do you think?" I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. "Is something wrong?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Don't play dumb, Kate. I saw you." Her face went pale. "Saw me?" "Outside the silver ivy," I said, my tone sharp. "With Mark." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her silence said more than any excuse ever could. I didn't go home right away after seeing them together. The sight of Kate and Mark kissing outside the bar replayed in my head like a nightmare I couldn't escape. The flickering neon sign, the way Mark's hand rested casually on her back, the way Kate didn't pull away, it was all seared into my mind. I walked aimlessly through the city, letting the cold night air sting my face, hoping it might numb the ache in my chest. How long has this been going on? The question repeated endlessly in my mind. Had this been building for weeks? Months? Longer? It wasn't just the kiss. It was the ease between them, the way they'd laughed together, oblivious to the world around them. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to drown out the thoughts clawing at the edges of my sanity. But instead, I kept walking, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I finally returned home. The house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the living room. I paused in the entryway, taking in the familiar sight of our home, the home we'd built together over the years. Now it felt foreign, like I was a stranger in someone else's life. Kate's coat was draped neatly over the back of a chair, and her shoes were lined up by the door. She was already in bed. Of course she was. I could picture her lying there, her eyes closed, her breathing steady, pretending that nothing had happened. I didn't go to the bedroom. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed a blanket from the closet and settled onto the couch. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, their faces inches apart, the kiss that shattered everything we'd built. By the time the sun rose, I felt like I'd aged a decade. When I finally entered the kitchen, Kate was standing by the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She was dressed in one of her oversized sweaters, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked up when she saw me, offering a small, cautious smile. "Morning," she said, her tone light, almost casual. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. How can she act like nothing happened? "Where were you last night?" I asked, my voice cold and flat. She blinked, her smile faltering. "I told you. I was working late. We had a big campaign to finalize." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Don't lie to me, Kate. I saw you." Her eyes widened, her hands stilling mid-motion. "Saw me? Outside that bar." I said, each word deliberate and heavy. "With Mark. You kissed him." The coffee cup slipped from her hands, clattering onto the counter and spilling its contents. She didn't move to clean it up. Instead, she stood there, staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I crossed my arms, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "I'm listening." She fumbled for words, her voice trembling. "It wasn't what it looked like. It was a mistake. I got caught up in the moment. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You kissed him, Kate. You chose him. And you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head. "I wasn't thinking. I was confused. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me." "Believe you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "After what I saw, why the hell would I believe anything you say?" Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. Not then. All I could feel was the sharp, unrelenting pain of betrayal. "You don't get to cry," I said, my voice hard. "You did this. You made this choice." Her hands trembled as she tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, my chest heaving with anger. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "It was a mistake. I love you. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, the weight of her words only deepening the ache inside me. "You say you love me, but what you did shows the opposite. If you loved me, you wouldn't have kissed him. You wouldn't have let it get this far." Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know why I did it," she sobbed. "I've been feeling so lost, so disconnected. It wasn't about him. It was about me." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers that would somehow make sense of her betrayal. But deep down, I knew there were no answers that could undo the damage. "I can't do this right now," I said, my voice trembling. "I need some space." I turned and left the kitchen, her cries echoing behind me. That evening, I found myself back on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the events of the day replayed in my mind. Her excuses, her tears, they all felt hollow. How could I trust her again? How could we ever come back from this? As the hours dragged on, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The woman I'd built my life around was no longer the woman I knew, and I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive her. The first therapy session after the kiss was excruciating. Sitting in Dr. Hayes' office, the air felt heavier than ever. Kate sat across from me on the plush beige couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale and tense. I couldn't look at her for long without the image of her and Mark flashing in my mind. Dr. Hayes, calm and observant as always, broke the silence. "I understand there's been a significant event since we last met. Ethan, would you like to start?" I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees, staring at the carpet. "What's there to say?" "She kissed him," I said, my voice flat, each word dripping with anger. "After everything, after the note, after the rooftop, after she promised it was just emotional, she kissed him." Kate flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, please." No, I snapped, cutting her off. You don't get to explain it away this time, Kate. I'm tired of hearing it didn't mean anything or I wasn't thinking. You don't accidentally kiss someone, especially not the man I've already told you I don't trust. Dr. Hayes held up her hand, her voice steady. Let's pause for a moment. Ethan, I hear your frustration and anger, and they're valid. But to move forward, we need to unpack what led to this moment. Kate, would you like to share your perspective? Kate's voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. I don't know what's wrong with me, she said, her hands shaking in her lap. I've been feeling so lost, so disconnected. When I'm with Mark, it's like I forget about everything weighing me down. It's not about him. It's about escaping. But I know that doesn't make it right. Her words didn't soothe me. If anything, they infuriated me more. Escaping? I repeated, my tone sharp. You're escaping by blowing up our marriage? That's your solution? I don't have a solution, she cried, her tears spilling over. I'm trying, Ethan. I'm trying to figure out why I've been like this, why I made these mistakes. I don't want to lose you. I turned to Dr. Hayes, desperate for clarity. How am I supposed to believe anything she says? She kissed him. She looked me in the eye after everything and promised it was over. And then she went and kissed him. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, her expression soft but serious. Ethan, rebuilding trust after betrayal is one of the hardest things a relationship can go through. But it's not impossible. Right now, your pain is fresh, and that's completely normal. Healing will take time, and both of you will need to decide if you're willing to put in that time and effort. Kate spoke up, her voice raw. I'm willing. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. I know I've broken your trust, but I love you. I don't want to lose us. Her words hung in the air, but they felt weightless to me. Love? How could she claim to love me while she was doing this? I don't even know if I want to try anymore. I admitted, my voice cracking. Every time I think we're making progress, you pull me back to square one. How many times am I supposed to forgive you? Dr. Hayes leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. That's a fair question, Ethan. Forgiveness isn't something you can rush or force. It's a choice, and it has to come from a place of understanding and genuine effort from both partners. Kate, what steps are you willing to take to rebuild trust? Kate wiped her eyes, her voice steadying slightly. I'll block Mark. I'll change jobs if that's what it takes. I'll be completely transparent. No more secrets, no more lies. I'll do whatever Ethan needs to feel secure again. For the first time, she sounded resolute, but I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. 2 weeks passed, and things seemed to be stabilizing, or at least as much as they could in the aftermath of what had happened. Kate had blocked Mark on social media and started working remotely to avoid him. We continued therapy, where Dr. Hayes encouraged us to focus on small steps. Open communication, rebuilding intimacy, and identifying the cracks in our relationship that had gone unnoticed for so long. It was far from perfect, but I was starting to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. Then it happened. I came home early one evening, exhausted from a long day at work. As I entered the living room, I noticed Kate sitting on the couch, her phone in her lap. She didn't hear me come in, too engrossed in whatever she was doing. Mark's not worth it, she typed, pausing before hitting send. My heart dropped. Really, Kate? I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. She jumped, her phone slipping from her hands and landing on the floor. Ethan, I wasn't. Don't lie to me, I shouted, all the anger I'd tried to suppress coming to the surface. You were texting him, weren't you? She scrambled to grab the phone, her hands shaking. It wasn't what it looked like, she said, her voice frantic. I wasn't going to send it, but you wanted to. I said bitterly, my chest tight with betrayal. You still wanted him, didn't you? Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. When we returned to Dr. Hayes' office the next day, I didn't hold back. She tried to text him, I said as soon as we sat down. After everything, after promising it was over, she still tried to contact him. Kate buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I didn't send it, she said through her tears. I swear, Ethan, I wasn't going to send it. Dr. Hayes looked at Kate, her tone calm but firm. Kate, why did you feel the need to reach out to Mark again? Kate's shoulders shook as she tried to speak. I don't know, she admitted. I was feeling scared, scared that Ethan would never forgive me, scared that I'd already lost everything. I wasn't thinking straight. Fear doesn't justify betrayal. I said, my voice low but sharp. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? How am I supposed to trust you again? Dr. Hayes interjected gently. Ethan, trust isn't rebuilt overnight, and it's not something Kate can promise with words alone. It requires consistent actions, transparency, and time. Kate, are you willing to put in that effort? Yes, Kate said without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. I don't know if I can keep doing this, I said quietly. It's killing me. Dr. Hayes nodded. It's okay to feel that way, Ethan. This process is incredibly painful. But before you make any final decisions, I encourage you to take some time to reflect. You've both come this far, and that means something. Kate reached for my hand, her touch hesitant. Please, Ethan, she said softly. Don't give up on us. Not yet. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze her hand in return. I didn't know if I could. The text incident had drained whatever fragile hope I had left. Over the days that followed, the house felt heavier than ever. The silence between Kate and me was no longer just strained, it was suffocating. Even when she tried to engage, her words fell flat against the barrier I'd built around myself. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office or finding excuses to leave the house. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, my thoughts always circled back to her. To the kiss, to the text, to the countless promises she'd made and broken. One night, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Kate was upstairs, likely crying again. She'd been doing that a lot lately. I stared at the wedding photo hanging on the wall. We looked so happy in it, so full of hope and promise. I barely recognized the couple in that picture anymore. What had happened to us? How had we gone from being each other's everything to this, a hollow shell of what we once were? I finished the whiskey in one long gulp and set the glass down with a heavy thud. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about walking away. The next morning, I found Kate in the kitchen. She was making coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. Morning, she said, her voice tentative. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed a mug from the cabinet and poured myself some coffee, the silence between us thick and oppressive. Ethan, she began, her voice trembling. I know I've said this before, but I'm sorry. I really am. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can to make this right. I set my mug down, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Kate, I don't think it's enough anymore. Her face crumpled, her hands clutching the edge of the counter. What do you mean? I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice cracking. I've tried. God, have I tried. But every time I think we're making progress, something happens that reminds me of what you did. The kiss. The text. It's like a knife in the gut every time. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt numb. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. I continued, my chest tight. And without trust, what do we have? Ethan, please, she sobbed, stepping closer. Don't give up on us. Not yet. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what you need. I shook my head, stepping back. I don't even know what I need anymore, Kate. I don't know who I am in this marriage. All I know is that I'm tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I'm not enough. Tired of constantly wondering if you're being honest with me. She reached for my hand, her touch desperate. Please, she whispered. Don't walk away. We can fix this. I know we can. Her tears softened something inside me, but not enough to change my mind. I need time, I said finally, pulling my hand away. Time to figure out if I can even keep doing this. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, her quiet sobs following me down the hall. I called Aaron later that afternoon, my voice shaky as I asked if he had time to meet. He didn't hesitate. Come over, he said. I'll make coffee. When I arrived, Aaron greeted me with a firm handshake and a look of concern. He didn't press me for details, waiting until I was ready to talk. I'm done, I said after a long silence, my voice hollow. I can't keep doing this, Aaron. It's killing me. He set his coffee down, leaning back in his chair. What happened? I told him everything. The kiss, the text, the promises Kate had broken time and time again. By the time I finished, my chest felt lighter, like I'd been carrying the weight of it alone for far too long. I don't blame you, Aaron said finally. Anyone in your shoes would feel the same. But, are you sure you're ready to walk away? What other choice do I have? I asked, my voice rising. She kissed him, Aaron. She tried to text him during therapy. How am I supposed to forgive that? I'm not saying you have to forgive her, Aaron said. But I've known you a long time, Ethan. You're not the kind of guy who walks away from a fight unless you've given it everything you've got. Are you sure you've done that? I've stayed. I've gone to therapy. What else is there? Aaron shrugged. Maybe nothing. Or maybe there's more to unpack. Either way, if you leave now, you'll always wonder if you could have saved it. And you're not the kind of guy who likes living with what-ifs. His words hit harder than I expected. What if I'm just delaying the inevitable? I asked quietly. Then at least you'll know, Aaron said. And knowing is better than wondering. I drove home that evening, Aaron's words echoing in my mind. He was right, I didn't want to live with regrets. If there was even a sliver of hope for Kate and me, I needed to see it through. When I walked through the door, Kate was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up at me, her eyes red from crying. Hey, she said softly. I sat down across from her, the weight of the day pressing heavily on my shoulders. I want to keep going with therapy, I said finally. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through her despair. You do? I nodded. But this is it, Kate. If we're going to do this, it has to be all in. No more secrets, no more lies. If you can't give me that, then we're done. I will, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I promise, Ethan. No more lies. No more secrets. For the first time in weeks, her words felt real. The sky was overcast as I pulled into the small cafe where Aaron and I often met. It was our unofficial spot, a quiet place with mismatched furniture and the smell of fresh-baked pastries that seemed to linger in the air. I hadn't planned to call in that morning, but after the night I'd had, tossing and turning, Kate's betrayal replaying in my mind, I needed to talk to someone who could ground me. Aaron was already there when I arrived, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked up from his phone and waved me over. You look like hell, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Feel like it too, I muttered, signaling the waitress for my usual. Aaron studied me for a moment, his expression shifting from casual to concerned. What's going on, Ethan? I let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through my hair. It's Kate, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how much more of this I can take. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. What happened? She kissed him. I said bluntly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Outside a bar. And if that wasn't bad enough, I caught her trying to text him during therapy. She said she didn't send it, but it doesn't matter. She wanted to. Aaron's brows furrowed, and he let out a low whistle. Man, I'm sorry. I've tried. I continued, my voice rising slightly. I've given her every chance to make this right, to prove she's still invested in us. But every time I think we're making progress, she does something to tear it all down again. The waitress arrived with my coffee, and I took a long sip, hoping it would steady me. It didn't. I don't know what to do anymore, I admitted. I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. Like maybe it's time to just let go. Aaron didn't respond right away. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed as he regarded me with a thoughtful expression. Ethan, he said finally, his tone measured. I hear what you're saying. And if you really think there's no saving this, then maybe it is time to walk away. But he paused, leaning forward again. Are you sure you've done everything you can? I frowned. What do you mean? I've stayed. I've gone to therapy. I've listened to her excuses, her explanations. What more can I do? I'm not saying you haven't tried, Aaron said. But sometimes, trying isn't enough if you're not fully in it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But if you let that anger control you, you'll never know if this could have been fixed. Why should I even care about fixing it? I snapped, the frustration I'd been holding back spilling out. She's the one who ruined everything. not me. She kissed him. She betrayed me. Aaron nodded, unshaken by my outburst. You're right. She messed up big time. But you married her for a reason, Ethan. You love her enough to build a life together. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you still love her enough to try rebuilding that life? Even if it's hard as hell. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared down at my coffee, the steam curling into the air like the tangled mess of my thoughts. I don't know, I admitted after a long silence. That's fair, Aaron said. But here's the thing. If you give up now, without really seeing this through, you'll never know. And that kind of doubt, it sticks with you. If therapy doesn't work, if she keeps breaking your trust, then fine. Walk away. But don't let anger or pride make that decision for you. I looked up at him, my chest tight with a mix of frustration and something else. Hope? Maybe? You really think therapy can fix this? Aaron shrugged. I don't know. But I do know that if you quit now, you'll always wonder if you could have done more. And you're not the kind of guy who likes living with what-ifs. He wasn't wrong. I sighed, rubbing my temples. You make it sound so damn simple. It's not, Aaron said with a small smile. But the hard things are usually the ones worth fighting for. As we left the cafe, Aaron clapped me on the shoulder. Whatever you decide, Ethan, I've got your back. But just don't rush it, okay? Take your time. Yeah, I said, though the knot in my stomach remained. Driving home, I thought about what he'd said. Was I letting my anger cloud my judgment? Was I walking away too soon? The truth was, I didn't know. But one thing was certain. If I was going to move forward, whether that meant saving my marriage or letting it go, I needed to be sure. That evening, I sat across from Kate at the dinner table. The silence between us was thick, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel entirely hopeless. I want to keep going with therapy, I said finally. Kate's head snapped up, her eyes widening in surprise. You do. I nodded. But only if you're all in. No more half-truths, no more holding back. If we're going to do this, we do it together. She swallowed hard, tears pooling in her eyes. I'm in, she said, her voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. I promise. For the first time in a long time, her words felt real. Aaron's words echoed in my mind during the days that followed. Deep down, I knew he was right. If I walked away now, I'd always wonder if I could have done more. And as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me still loved Kate. When we went to therapy that week, I brought everything to the surface. Kate texted Mark. I said bluntly as the session began. Her face paled, and Dr. Hayes immediately leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the situation. I wasn't going to send it, Kate said quickly, her voice shaking. I know it was wrong, and I stopped myself before it went any further. Dr. Hayes held up a hand to stop me from responding immediately. Kate, why did you feel the need to reach out to Mark again? Kate hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I think it was because I was scared. Scared that Ethan would never forgive me. Scared that I'd already ruined everything. So, you reached out to the person who was part of the problem? I asked bitterly. Dr. Hayes interjected gently. Ethan, I can see how much pain this has caused you. But Kate's fear of losing you, and her poor decision to handle that fear by reaching out to Mark, is something we need to explore. I wanted to argue, but I held back. Therapy wasn't about winning an argument. It was about figuring out if there was still a way forward. That session marked a turning point, not just for me, but for Kate as well. She became more open in therapy, admitting things she'd kept hidden for years. I never meant to hurt you, she told me one evening after a particularly emotional session. But I've spent so much of our marriage feeling like I wasn't enough. Not for you, not for myself. Mark was a distraction, a way to avoid facing my own insecurities. And what about me? I asked, my voice raw. Did you think I didn't have insecurities? That I didn't feel invisible sometimes? She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. I never thought of it that way, she admitted. I was so wrapped up in my own fears that I didn't see yours. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a step in that direction. The process of rebuilding wasn't linear. Some days, it felt like we were making progress, laughing at old jokes, sharing quiet moments over coffee. Other days, the weight of her betrayal hung between us like a wall we couldn't breach. But slowly, things began to change. Kate blocked Mark on every platform, a gesture that might have seemed small to some, but to me, it was monumental. She also committed to therapy with an intensity one hadn't seen before, often journaling her thoughts and sharing them during our sessions. "I want to earn your trust back," she told me one night as we sat on the couch. "I know it won't happen overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Her sincerity was undeniable, and while the scars of her actions would never fully fade, I started to believe that we could move forward together. 6 months after the rooftop incident, we had our final therapy session with Dr. Hayes. "You've both come a long way," she said, her tone warm but firm. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Rebuilding trust takes time, and there will be setbacks. The key is to face them together as partners." Kate reached for my hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't hesitate to take it. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Kate turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked quietly. I considered her question carefully before answering. "I think we're getting there. It'll take time, but as long as we keep trying, I think we can be better than okay." She smiled, a small, hopeful smile that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was ours. We made a pact to prioritize each other, to communicate openly, and to never let the distance between us grow unnoticed again. Kate left her job shortly after our therapy ended, recognizing that the environment and the people in it were no longer healthy for her or our relationship. She took a position at a smaller firm, one that allowed her more flexibility and less pressure. As for me, I worked on letting go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long. I started seeing a therapist on my own, learning how to process my emotions without letting them fester. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the memory of that kiss or that text would surface unbidden. But those moments grew less frequent over time, replaced by new memories, better ones. We celebrated our 10th anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. As we clinked glasses, Kate reached across the table to take my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving us another chance." I squeezed her hand, my heart full of a cautious but growing hope. "Thank you for fighting for us." Looking back, I realized that the cracks in our marriage hadn't been the end. They'd been a call to action, a chance to rebuild something stronger. Kate and I weren't perfect, and we never would be. But we learned how to face the imperfections together, to see them not as failures, but as opportunities to grow. And in the end, that's what saved us. Not the absence of pain, but the willingness to confront it, to learn from it, and to keep moving forward, hand in hand.